Monterey pine is a native plant here. There's 3 stands of it here, conveniently in Monterey. And then the 3rd stand is up at Nuevo, Swanton. Anybody been to Swanton Ranch? Okay, so the northernmost stand of Monterey pine is in Swanton. It pretty much got nuked during the CZU fire, 2020 or whenever that was. This stand was in very, very bad condition. It's on the very southern end of its range, so it's stressed out more so than if it gets less rain. What we're experiencing today, if you notice the road's wet, Monterey pine loves that because it lives off of that fog drip. So that's where it gets a lot of its moisture. And the last few years, we've had less fog. People here in town can tell you, not been as foggy as they historically remember it. So stress this forest out. Beginning in 2013, there was a drought here, 7 years of drought. Stressed the trees even more. Bark beetle infestation attacked the trees because they were so stressed. Killed about 75% of the trees that were over 20 inches in diameter. A huge die-off in this forest. As you'll see as we drive in there, the forest, this is literally a wildland urban interface, if you know what that means. So there's literally a line, forest on one side, houses on the other. And dead forest right next to those houses presented a significant public safety hazard. So our goal, in conjunction with CAL FIRE, I worked for CAL FIRE for several years, retired here as the chief of CAL FIRE, and we worked with them. I now work with the San Luis Obispo County Fire Safe Council, which is a not-for-profit organization. We partnered together to try to do 2 things. One is to reduce the safety problem of this dead forest next to community, and the second is to restore the forest to a healthy condition. So we know that a healthy forest is a safer forest. So what we've been doing now for the last 9 years, the first 5 years of it was getting public opinion changed, because the public didn't want anybody to do anything. Just leave it alone, let the forest be the forest, which is fine. Monterey pine loves fire. It'll be very happy with fire. It'll just flush up like crazy because it's a serotinous forest. So forest would have been fine with a fire. Town, probably not so much. So we had to find that balance. A lot of that was public education. How do we get the public to understand what we're going to try to do is actually beneficial? The next steps were to getting through the permitting processes of how do we go in and do the treatments that we want to do with permitting processes. How many are CEQA? Everybody loves CEQA? Timber harvest plans, vegetation treatment plans, VMPs, all the permitting processes that are available to use to try to do treatments. And then you throw in the curveball, this is in the coastal zone. So the coastal zone of California presents its entirely new set of regulations, rules, and processes on top of that. So it's literally a minefield to weave your way through to get to the permitting process. We did it. We've converted the public opinion from 90% against to 90% in favor of what we're doing here. So as you go through your careers, you'll find that the actual techniques of doing the treatment is easy. Getting to doing the treatments is the complicated part of getting through the permitting processes, make sure you're environmentally compliant, that you've taken all the steps necessary to address whether there be species issues, whether there be cultural issues, whether there be other regulatory issues, but far and above all of that is public opinion. And you have to manage the public opinion piece as much as you have to do all of the other pieces and parts that go with this process. So that's a lot of what the Fire Safe Council's job is to manage the public opinion side. Obviously a cemetery here. Right behind the cemetery here is that row of houses I spoke about. So it just wraps around this entire west side of the forest, all the way back down into town. And I don't know if you noticed as we were coming in, there were the ambulances, there was big signs that says Covell Ranch Clydesdale horses. That's what they do here, is they raise Clydesdale horses on the ranch. So it's about a 3,000 acre ranch, about 1,100 of it is Monterey pine. The rest of it's oak woodland and grasslands. They do tours. If you want to take a Clydesdale horse tour, or they do hay wagon tours. That's how they make money. The forest itself is under conservation easement held by the Nature Conservancy. So the Nature Conservancy puts its own set of rules on top of all the other rules that apply. If you noticed on this side of the road, Jeremy used looks like a park setting. It's to some degree intentional. We don't want the forest here to look like a park. That's not our goal. That's the fuel break side. So the intent is to limb the trees up, keep fire that's in there on the ground, low intensity ground fire. So you can go in and firefighters can go in and attack that. and or air tankers and helicopters, their drops will reach the ground. So you want the canopy open enough so those drops will actually reach the ground, not get hung up in the trees. So that's the intent of that. Again, under an east wind, fire starting here, blowing into town, would hit this whole west side of town. There's not enough fire resources to deal with that. So part of this whole process and looking at it from a fire protection standpoint is how do you avoid that situation occurring? As we were commenting earlier, Monterey pine is a serotinous forest. Everybody know what that means? Any questions? Yeah. So it generally likes fire. The cones like fire. They like heat to open, to distribute their seeds. So as we walk through here, we haven't had a fire in here, but you'll see some seedlings. That's because it's getting hot enough for the cones to open. Where we do have fires in here, and we have had fires in here, you'll get just a carpet of seedlings, just hundreds of seedlings. We did some of the initial surveys in here on the permitting side of things. There was 800 trees per acre in some of these areas. This location can support about 200 trees per acre. So that's our management goal when we walk through here and see what they've done in the treatment, is to get to about 200 trees per acre. The permit and the processes said we want to retain 200 8-inch or larger trees per acre. That's our goal. Remember I said the bigger trees all died off in the bark beetles? So there's not 200 8-inch or larger trees per acre throughout most of this forest. So what we're doing is we're retaining smaller trees. Again, trying to shoot for that 200 stems per acre goal, because that's what this forest can sustain. We're leaving understory in places. In a lot of instances, we'll find wood rat nests. Wood rat's a protected species, and oftentimes they'll grow with toyon or oak clusters or coffeeberry. So we'll do both. We'll put a perimeter around the wood rat nest, and that also preserves a certain percentage of understory vegetation. This is red-legged frog upland habitat, another condition to contend with. So we have mitigation measures that Fish and Wildlife require us to do on red-legged frog, and that is to leave a lot of downed woody debris. So as you go through, you'll see some fairly large logs that are laid on the ground. We have to leave every log that's over 12 inches in diameter on the ground. That was already down for red-legged frog refugia is the term. And so that was on a site visit with Fish and Wildlife when they first started. Since that time, they've kind of changed their mind a little bit because they didn't realize there would be that many logs on the ground. As we go through this long term, and by long term I mean years and years and years of treatment, we'll come back and remove some of those down logs. Ron asked me a question about treatments. So we got funding in a grant. This is all grant funded. Funding in a grant to do initial treatments across the whole, about 75% of the stand. And that's what we've done so far. We just received another grant to finish the other 25% of initial treatment and then come back and do secondary treatments across the entire stand. So what we'll be doing in that secondary treatment is coming back, removing some of that dead down material. The ultimate goal in here would be to put fire back on the ground in here. Low prescribed fire, low intensity ground fire. Again, the Monterey pine would love it. The forest would be healthier for it. We would remove a lot of that understory that's competing with the Monterey pine. Anybody got a sense of what might be the two limiting factors on putting prescribed fire on the ground in here? There's two.
Some lack of awareness and also just general fear that using fire around your home.
Well, you're on the right track there. The community is what it's all about. And putting fire on the ground, and they're concerned about fire safety, right? The bigger one we're worried about, because we think we can control the ground fire without a big problem, that'd be a community education thing, smoke. Smoke is a huge problem with prescribed fire. Where's that smoke going? And here it's going to go right into town. So the bigger concern of anything putting prescribed fire on the ground here is smoke management. Because this, as we walk out here, you look at the duff is really thick. So it's going to smoke for days. It's going to smolder in there for days. And that wind is going to change, and ultimately it's going to go right into town, and they're going to hate us. So you get 4 complaints, the Air Pollution Control Board, and then you get a $10,000 fine. So we're not interested in getting fined, and we're going to get more than 4 complaints, I can assure you that. So we're having to find a surrogate for that, being able to put prescribed fire on the ground. We have to find a surrogate. So that's what we're trying to do here. There's another treatment project going on the other side of Cambria, over in what's called Rancho Marino. And Rancho Marino is a reserve managed by UC Santa Barbara. They're doing essentially the same thing this crew's doing, but instead of chipping the material back onto the ground, they're dragging it out to the road, chipping it into trucks and hauling it away. So we're watching, kind of comparing these two techniques to see what happens over time. Significant cost difference, like 4 times as expensive to do that as it is to do. So I did mention competition between plants. So Monterey pine likes fire because it's serotinous. What's one of the other things that fire does in a forest? Opens it up, gets sunlight to the ground. Pines like sun. Okay, they need sun. They're an intolerant species. So as you get more and more understory growing, shades out the seedlings, outcompetes the seedlings. They can't get enough sun. So that's one of the reasons for thinning the understory out. Get sun to the ground, let the tree sprout, let them grow. They'll eventually outgrow the understory, as you know, because the understory 6 to 8 feet. These pines will grow, 50, 75 feet, something like that. Jeremy.
Does the fire reduce bark beetle populations?
It does. It helps with the sanitation of the forest as well. This forest is a triple winter. We call it. It's got 4-time winter when you bring bark beetles in. But endemic in this forest is pitch canker, dwarf mistletoe, and western gall rust. Those are 3 things that are infecting this forest. And we'll see them as we walk down. Some of the trees are triple winters. They got all of them. Some just have one of those. As we go through, that's one of the other reasons for using hand crews versus mechanized equipment in here in our thinning, is the crew members can select the trees they leave. It's harder to do that with mechanized equipment. It's just hard to do that. So they're able to select the trees. We kind of joke about it. We love them to select. We tell them to select the healthiest trees. If we told them to select only the healthy trees, there wouldn't be any left, because they're all afflicted with, almost all of them afflicted with something. But we're trying to, reduce that. Almost all of those factors, gall rust and mistletoe and pitch canker, spread by proximity. So if we can we're looking for 20-foot spacing, 200 trees per acre, a little social distancing at least to kind of reduce that spread. So in our secondary, tertiary treatments, we'll come through and we'll thin out again, and we'll start, favoring the healthier trees that we can do. It's going to take a long time. This is a decades-long restoration process here. It's not a one-shot deal.
With the red-legged frog, is that another issue with getting prescribed fire out here, or are they considered capable of escaping prescribed fire?
Yeah, so this is considered red-legged frog upland habitat. So red-legged frogs typically are the creeks. So there's a creek that runs through, we'll probably go look at it. It's Leffingwell Creek. It runs from up at just the headwaters of it. It runs out and exits at the ocean at Leffingwell Beach. And then Santa Rosa Creek, which we cross coming down the road, goes through the middle of town. Both of those have red-legged frogs in them. The theory is they would migrate from one creek to the other in this upland habitat. So fire is a normal part of this habitat. So they just deal with it kind of thing in its historical context. Historically, this forest, let's do a little test here. Serotinous fire-adapted species, right? These trees live to be about 100 years old. They don't live very long. They just don't live very long. So a tree that lives 100 years old and is fire adapted, how frequently do you think fire would visit it? Think about that for a minute. For the species to become fire adapted, it's got to have fairly routine fire, right? 100 years old, it's fire adapted. 20 to 30 year fire return interval in here in a natural condition. In the natural conditions, lightning fires, we get lightning fires in here periodically, and the other was Native American burning. So the Native Americans in here burned this forest to what they called a see-through forest. They wanted to be able to see through the forest to see where the kids are playing, to see are there predators, to see is there game, to grow things, to harvest the new growth. The pines are feed source, the oaks are feed source, etc. So that was a management technique also. The Selenian tribe was the tribe present in this area. Monterey pine, another factoid of Monterey pine. In its native habitat here, it's not a particularly important commercial tree species. As you look at them, they're not very straight, they're kind of crooked. All of this was logged at the end of the 1800s and early 1900s. In fact, where we're going to walk down to here in a couple of minutes was an old sawmill site that operated here around 1900, closed in 1930s. So they did log all of this in the late 1800s, left all the really shitty trees. So that's the propagation that's here. Worldwide, anybody know what happens with Monterey pine, worldwide Pinus radiata? Most widely planted timber species in the world for production, for commercial forestry. If you buy pine moldings, like window trim, door trims. Almost all of it is Monterey pine. Coming out of Chile, Africa, Australia, New Zealand. Grows straight as an arrow. Beautiful trees. You think, how can that be the same tree as these trees? But it is. You know, they're grown they're growing tree farms. You know. But anyway, so that's a little background on Monterey pine.
Dan, for the folks that got here a little bit late, can you tell them who you are and who you're with?
Oh, sure. So my name's Dan Turner, and I'm the executive director of the San Luis Obispo County Fire Safe Council. So we're a not-for-profit organization. The executive director is essentially the lead staff person. The board of directors is 34 members of stakeholders in the county. So we have county supervisors, air pollution, Cal Poly, UC, let me think, CAL FIRE, PG&E, Cattlemen's Association. It's really the whole range of stakeholders in the fire safety realm. We work under grants. All of our programs are grant funded. We currently are conducting about 100 projects across the county of various types, from education projects to this, forest management, managing about $18 million in grants right now.
And what did you do before that?
So before that, back in the day, I was in your shoes. I went to Cal Poly as a forestry graduate from Cal Poly. Got lucky. I went to work the next day for CAL FIRE here in San Luis Obispo County. Worked here for several years, and then promoted. I worked the rank of battalion chief here, and then promoted and lived in Santa Cruz. Worked in Santa Cruz County for 12 years, and then promoted back to San Luis Obispo County and retired here as the chief of CAL FIRE for San Luis Obispo, which is San Luis County, Santa Barbara, and Ventura County operations. So great career, great places to live, but somebody's got to do it. So fun. I had a great time. Saw lots of interesting things. So CAL FIRE's hiring. If you guys are looking, in fact, they're going to hire about 1,000 new employees here in the next year. Everybody ready to go for a walk? If you got water, it might be a good idea to grab a bottle of water or something and take with it. You can give this to me. All rust. Yeah.
Gallbladder.
I know. It's probably ought to be taken out because it's dead, or it does last. Dead, it may not know it yet. Another affliction. So wall rust is kind of like tree cancer, if you will. So in some instances it'll kill the tree, other instances it'll just afflict it. Stymie its growth. That was pretty severe case.
Dwarf mistletoe.
This was the sawmill site I mentioned earlier. So this was an active sawmill. The trees weren't in here. It was an active sawmill site until about 1930, closed down, and then the community used it for rodeo grounds. So they had rodeos up here. And then the community used it for picnic grounds. So it had a lot of disturbance. So open ground, a lot of activity going on. And one of the things we talked about, Monterey pine likes sun, likes disturbance, or likes a fire, or likes something like that to get sun to the ground so it can germinate. So does French broom. So Steve Biddle. Steve, this is a Cal Poly urban forestry
Welcome.
class. So Steve's a native here from Cambria area. He works for the Fire Safe Council. And Steve, I was just talking to him about French broom, and perfectly you brought one along.
Yes, my nemesis.
So we jokingly call Steve our broom master. So Steve's job in Cambria up here is to seek and destroy all French broom possible. Wow. Incredibly invasive plant. Describe what this meadow looked like the first time we came in here.
Well, I was here on the second go around, I think. They had done some work before, but first, look at the taproot on that thing. So I could barely pull that out. And we've had specimens, the base of it here, the biggest one was about like that, and the thing was at least 15, 16 feet tall. And then this stuff, when it gets so dense, this side by side, that I could hit it with my truck at 60 miles an hour in four-wheel drive and I ain't going anywhere. So
Got a bright yellow flower on it.
it's real pretty, It's drought tolerant, obviously. 'Cause
So this area was about 8 to 10 foot of French broom in this meadow, solid, when we first started.
Where is it from? You said it's non-native.
It's non-native. It's people like to plant it because it's actually a pretty attractive plant. It's got a great yellow blossom on it, looks really attractive. You know, poison oak looks pretty nice too. It's got a nice, it's nice and green in the spring and nice and colorful in the fall. But you probably don't want to do it. Just ill-advised to plant it. We try like crazy to get nurseries. They're still selling it. We try to get them to stop selling it. So sometimes they're good about that. Sometimes they're not. The roadsides in town where there was disturbance, where they had road cuts, French broom like crazy. Again, they like disturbance. Open meadows like this where there's sun, French broom. So Steve has done a fantastic job. I would say 95% of the French broom in Cambria is under some degree of management right now.
I keep finding new ones.
Yeah.
So I'd lower that number.
All
a
right,
little bit.
so lower. But what we do is, even with these, 8-foot tall French broom plants, one of the things you don't want to move them. They're full of seeds. If you move them, they'll drop the seeds and scatter the plants. The seeds persist for decades. So our treatment methodology is we'll pull it, pile it, stack it right there on its location, and then burn those piles. And then follow that up subsequent years with herbicide treatment, just hand application herbicide treatments to try to maintain it. It's literally, it's not like forest management. It's going to take us years and years and years to control it. But this is a pretty good demonstration site of French broom. You guys are welcome to adopt one if you want.
Yeah.
If you see it, pull it. There's some over here.
Oh,
behind
there's
Ron,
plenty
and-
out here.
Yeah, there's plenty available.
So it was about 4 years ago that I probably got started, and this had been pulled once already and sprayed. And I don't think it had been dealt with for a couple of years. So it was probably about this high. It's hard to see right now, but there's a ton of it out here. Comes in different brands, Ranger and Garlon. Right there. It does really good on this. It's doesn't do much harm to seedling pine and oaks. I flagged a couple of ones. If this is a seedling pine, the guys go like this, and if there's a broom right here, they spray it. Try to do their best to not get it on it. But sometimes, there's 30 of them right here, and there's a seedling pine in there. Sometimes it could take a little overspray, but it doesn't seem to harm it too much. There's a pile out over in there. So what they do is they pull it, pile it up, take chainsaws and slash it to make it so that it's not quite so big. We have put some paper in there on some of them so that when the CAL FIRE comes back and burns it, there's a dry spot in there, because once this stuff dries, it goes up right now. When the stuff is big, though, all this stuff starts dying. I did this, it's probably 4 years ago. We pulled and sprayed, and I think we did it about 2 years ago. There really wasn't a lot of pulling to do, but as we wander through here, you'll see it's just everywhere. Any other questions?
It's highly flammable.
A question: how's the pitch canker situation nowadays? What percent would you say is infected nowadays with pitch canker?
Well, I'm not a forester,
Okay.
so I couldn't really. There's quite a bit of it: pitch canker, the gall, the mistletoe, all of that. But we've had really good years of rain. The last 2 years have been really good rain, and so everything's looking pretty healthy.
Okay.
They bounce pretty well, I think.
Yeah, there are 110 permanent test plots, monitoring plots across the community. Well, maybe now. I think Sarah put some more in. But the intent is they were put in here in 2014. Sarah Bisbing was a Cal Poly professor. She's now at University of Nevada, Reno, still continuing to monitor these sites. We were looking at, forest mortality initially, and then looking at species diversity. Just continue to monitor that. We want to see how this moves over time. What happens here? And again, I mentioned earlier the treatments over at Rancho Marino. She has sites over there, the sites here, sites at Fiscal. You guys been to Fiscalini Ranch yet? You going to Fiscalini Ranch?
In a few weeks, I think.
Yeah, so that's a publicly owned open space right in the middle of Cambria. It's about 100 acres of Monterey pine in it. So there's sites in there too. So we're, different methodologies, different locations. Like I said, the further away from the coastline you move, it starts to change the composition of the forest here. So we want to kind of get that spectrum and just see over time what this is going to do. There's an interesting phenomenon here. You can't really see it, but behind you guys here, 200 yards back in there, is a plantation of Douglas fir. So Douglas fir is not, well, not in the near term native here. It's doing really well. The problem is it's not native, and it'll outcompete the Monterey pine because they're shade tolerant. Monterey pine's not shade tolerant. Douglas fir grow taller, so they'll shade out the Monterey pine, and they live a lot longer. So figure that one out. So a little bit of a, ethical dilemma is, do we remove them? Because they're spreading. So as a plantation, probably a 4 or 5 acre maybe plantation,
Maybe,
something like that. But now we're seeing Douglas fir popping up all over the place. So in 100 years, this would be a Douglas fir forest versus a Monterey pine forest because it'll outcompete the Monterey pine. Monterey pine's a rare species. So philosophically, do you go in and remove the Douglas fir? Interesting. A little ethical dilemma. Yeah.
I've heard some of the background story of this forest that there may have been native redwoods and Doug firs in here long ago.
There were probably ponderosa pine in here. So there's ponderosa pine on the ridge top back here behind us. In one of the surveys, they found a 36-inch ponderosa pine stump, which was a couple hundred years old.
Wow.
Cambria's been developed early 1700s. Do you know, Steve?
Yeah, it was when Hearst was, the Spaniards were
Spaniards
here first.
were the first Europeans
Ranchers,
here.
Yeah.
So they would have been the ones that would have planted something more likely than not. Although the Native Americans could have got a seedling up on the ridgetop, brought it down here and planted it. Redwood, maybe, as you go north up Highway 1. Fascinating trip, by the way, from a forest standpoint. You go up Highway 1, you get into those canyon drainages that are east-west facing. On the north-facing slope, you'll see redwood. On the south-facing slope, yucca. So right across the drainage from each other, it's that diverse. So it, potentially could have been down in here, decades ago, or eons ago, as it were. But remember, the Native Americans that lived here managed the forest. So they also could have introduced other species in here, relocated other species. They traded, with other tribes. Hey, I like your this, I like your that, let's trade. And they might have liked a redwood tree from the Ohlone or something or other and decided to see if it would grow here. Who knows? So that kind of stuff happens. So although they're serotinous and they want fire, if it gets warm enough, give sunlight to the ground, the cones will open and they'll deposit some seeds. So we're getting pretty good flush up. These are, if you look right here, this is this year's growth. 2 or 3 years ago. You see different generations of regrowth in here. A lot of ferns. If you come in here in the springtime, this is just flush with ferns in here. So it's working. We're liking what we're seeing on the treatments, and we're going to try to continue to do that. I'm not strong enough to pull a 6-inch French broom out of the ground.
They're tough.
Feel free though, if you guys want to. There's several right in here, a French broom. But this is what we're ultimately trying to get back to, is more of that see-through forest. Opportunity to get sunlight to the ground, get new seedlings coming up. Our secondary level of treatment will be to come through and favor the healthier seedlings, the healthier trees. Try to get to that 200 per acre, 20-foot spacing, healthy trees.
As Dan said, we invite you just to walk around through here and see how many babies are out. And at some point, we're going to probably have to deal with them and thin them out, because we're trying to, with what we're doing out, you can hear the chippers and the saws running. We're trying to get about 10 to 12 foot of spacing between them so that they can, they love sunlight, right? And if there's so many of them, they just crowd themselves out. And you can see like how dense it is over in there and some of it.
You notice the color coming back in these trees?
Yeah.
They're looking good.
They're looking good, yeah. We're happy with what we're seeing. So this is, the crew's working right up here. You can hear their chippers idling over there. Are they on break? Or
Yeah, they went on break just like 5 minutes ago.
Perfect. Okay. Because we won't be able to hear ourselves talking about the thing now. So this is Jeff Smith. Jeff is, like Steve Bitto that spoke a little bit ago, Jeff is out here working with the crew. Part of his job is to make sure they stay compliant with the prescriptions that we have for treatments out here, and also to chase off the looky-loos that come in here. We've had them walk right up to the chippers, just want to stick their head in the chipper and see what it's all about. Yeah, Jeff's job is to shoo them away, try to keep so the crew doesn't have to deal with that. So, and then it's illegal for people to be in here. Okay, it's private property, can't trespass. That doesn't mean they don't do it. So Jeff's job is to encourage them to leave.
The guys, it was a 15-man crew. We split the rest of them up on 2 chippers. And a couple guys go in and row up what's been cut and is down. And then the chippers come up behind and the rows go into the chip and get chipped and shot out. And it just cruised on through. Yesterday we did almost 2 acres. So it goes between 1.5 acres to 3 acres a day depending on how much fuel is on the ground and how much they have to chip.
Getting the name, location, and affiliation, that should be like the easiest part. And that's all I got, Dan.
So see if this truism works. You learn something every day, no matter how hard you try. So hopefully you guys learned something today from this. I had some questions coming up on is there space here for environmental scientists versus foresters? Absolutely. So when we do this permitting process, we work with foresters, biologists, fire people, air pollution specialists, fish and wildlife. So we're looking at species, we're looking at endangered species or special species. We're looking at tribal, cultural issues. So all of those things go into the team that builds the plan to do these treatments. So we take into consideration all of those factors and try to come up with a plan that addresses all of those. Sometimes we can't address all of them, because this organization wants this and this organization wants this, and you can't do both. So what we strive to do is get them to be happy enough in the middle. Sometimes that's as good as it gets. They're happy enough. So there can be people here that are very vocal and opinionated, express that. That's again the major role of the Fire Safe Council is public education, hand-holding, of getting them from absolutely no to at least maybe, or to yes, ideally. Happy enough. That's a lot of the work that's kind of not taught in your classes necessarily, unless you take conflict resolution, but that's what it is. How do you deal with conflict of people that have different opinions? They all believe their opinions, as they should, but they may or may not be right. So how do you get them, educate them, get them on board? It's as important to know who supports your project as it is to know who opposes your project. And why do they oppose it? Can you change their opinion by education? As to what? Demonstrate, take them out, show them. Take them out in advance. So when you're in the planning processes, we had an interesting dialogue going with U.S. Fish and Wildlife on red-legged frog out here. We had a set of mitigation measures that have been used for decades for red-legged frog mitigations. They're for timber harvest plants. Said we're going to use those same mitigations. They said no, not going to work. We want it. We've read your plan. We don't like it. We want you to do the following things, and those were unacceptable options for us. So we said, well, come on out. Let's show you what we're doing. Because we had a couple demo sites. They said, well, yeah, this is exactly what we want. We said, well, that's exactly what the plan says. So what's the problem? They looked at it through a different lens than we looked at it. So sometimes having them on site can't happen soon enough. It takes a lot of that anxiety away. In fact, they showed us a picture. We wanted to look just like that. We said, so do we. We'll use your picture in the plan. So that was, huge process. Put their fingerprints on the solution. So there's a career fair coming up. Had some folks talk to me about different kinds of jobs. Go to the career fair. If it's environmental, if it's fire, if it's forestry, fish and wildlife, fish, biotics. Go find out what these agencies and organizations are looking for, whether it be private or public agencies and organizations. They like Cal Poly graduates. I serve on the NRES Advisory Council, have for years. So I hear from the industry what they're looking for, and I hear from them about what they like about Cal Poly. Maybe a few things they don't like about Cal Poly, but you're held in high esteem generally by the industry, graduates coming out of this university. So, but go find out what they're looking for. Try to decide if you have a career path, and see if some of those career fair folks meet that, or find out from them, what are you looking for, and do I need to make a course adjustment here along the way to fit that model? So I'm glad you had an opportunity to come out. Thanks for doing that. We love to show this off and what we're doing. There's nobody else in the Monterey Pine Forest stand doing this. So we're kind of inventing it as we go. So it's good to have other sets of eyes look at it. If you guys have criticism, let me know. I'll run to Ron, let him filter them. But yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts or comments about what you saw. If there's something you have questions about or something you think, well, why aren't you doing, whatever that might be, we'd love to hear that from you.
All right, let's hear it for Dan.
Good job.
Start fighting against like a plan that they don't actually know what it's saying.
All the time.
Okay.
That's the norm.
Okay.
So when people say, I don't like that, one of the first things you want to ask them is, what do you know about it? Do you know what it's actually doing? And that site visits can work on that, or just sitting down. When I was a fire chief, I used to tell everybody my most important tool I had in my toolbox. I mean, we had air tankers and fire crews and fire engines, and I said, no. Coffee cup was my single most important tool. Go down, sit down with somebody, have a cup of coffee, and talk about what's going on. Because it's that part that makes the difference. The other stuff's pure science. Pure science only goes so far. It's the other part. And I dealt with a lot of government agencies, and go to city councils and boards and so forth. And the first time I would take a new person with me to see this process in action, they'd see them make a decision. They said, well, that's the wrong decision. I said, yeah, but it's a decision. So what it amounts to is the science, the common sense, the logic is only 49% of the decision. 51% of the decision is political, emotional opinion. When the two of them line up, you got a great decision. When they don't line up, you still have a decision. It may not be in compliance with what makes sense, but the decision makers always don't make sense. They're responding to other factors. And if you think as you're moving forward, they're going to say no, get them to the project, educate them what the project is, get them, your pathway is defined, how do we get to yes? What's the path to yes? And that's what you're looking for. Who has the authority to say yes? And how do we get them to say yes? That's 51% of the decision. So after that, it's simple. Facts don't matter, because even if you get them all to say yes and it's stupid facts, it's still yes. So try not to do that.